Welcome to Manage This, the podcast by project managers for project managers. Every couple of weeks we get together to talk about what matters to you as a professional project manager. We talk about project management certification, doing the stuff of project management, and we pick the brains of some of the leaders in the industry. I'm your host, Nick Walker, and with me are our resident experts, Crowe and Bill Yates. They are project managers themselves, and they instruct other project managers and those working to become one. Guys, here we are. It is officially summer now, and we're in that time of year when maybe things get a little bit more relaxed. I don't know. Does that feel like that to you?
I'm dressed up today, Nick. I don't feel relaxed today. I'm on my game.
You're on. Okay. Okay. Maybe nothing changes for you in the summertime.
It feels hot and muggy, I can tell you that.
Yeah, it feels like it's been summer for 3 weeks or more already, but here we are officially. Time of year that maybe some of us, Andy excluded, dress a little bit more relaxed.
Let me just say, Nick, that I am going to Hawaii in September.
Okay, there you
so
go.
That's going to be, and it's for 1 day of work or maybe 2 days of work and a lot more relaxation.
There you go.
So maybe at that point we'll get closer to your vision.
and it is the time of year when we think about vacations too. So a lot of things are going on, but it's also mid-year, and there's something that happens in mid-year in most companies, and that is. Are we ready to cue the scary music? This strikes terror into the hearts of many managers as well as employees. We're talking about, Andy,
Performance reviews.
performance reviews. There's the scary music. Okay. All right. Granted, some performance reviews are fairly routine. Nobody gets killed usually, but sometimes it can be kind of scary. Sometimes it can mean a job or no job.
Yeah, everybody's blood pressure is going to go up during that time. And that goes for the person giving the performance review, definitely for the person receiving it. It is a natural anxiety-producing event, and it causes a lot of people some nervousness. So we're here to talk through it and specifically look at it from a project manager's perspective. Project managers a lot of times have to either conduct these or give input into them. And so we're going to talk through that and hopefully help talk some people off the balcony.
Yeah, I feel like this is an opportunity for us to reach out and hold the hand of the project manager and kind of another hand on the back going, hey, we've been there, done that. We've been on the receiving end. We've had to do the research to provide feedback to team members. We can help you with this.
Good. Well, I've been on the receiving end of many performance
Yeah,
reviews.
we were going to talk to you about that.
Is this going to be a performance review? Oh, you're springing this on me. Okay, well, all right, here we go. But I've never given one. You guys have. And I know that's a huge responsibility. I'd like to get your perspective on that. Andy, how do you do it? How do you really get there?
There's a lot of different practices. And one interesting thing, one of my really good friends works for a sizable company here in Atlanta, and they are a utility company. And they rank every employee within the organization. I believe they have just shy of 2,000 employees. Every employee gets ranked from 1 to 1,999, all the way through. And I've always found that to be fascinating because I know how those exercises go. I've actually participated peripherally with them on some of those exercises before, and some of the gyrations that you go through in doing that. And so what it's going to be is, anything like that's probably going to look something like a bell curve, where the people on the left, there's a few people competing for those top 1 through 50, slots. There's a few people who are probably fairly obvious. They're having a bad year and they are going to get in the bottom 50 slots. And then it's going to start tapering up. And the ones in the middle, everybody's jockeying. Nobody wants to be to the right side of that bell curve. Everybody wants to be to the left side and to get the higher performance reviews. Now, the funny thing is, it's not directly tied to resource actions. Nobody gets explicitly fired because you came in last.
Okay.
Nobody explicitly gets a raise or a compensation adjustment up or down based on this. But the ranking starts to inform a lot of your HR. And so now, it amazes me that they actually do this and rank everybody from first to last. But that's the way they do it.
Does it impact where you can park? or where you can sit in the cafeteria?
Wouldn't that be funny? The furthest you've got to park further away. No, I don't think it does.
A nice long walk to the office so you can really think about how you can raise to the next percentile.
That's sort of an extreme example. Some organizations do that. They'll rank employees, and whereas it doesn't change anything immediately, in reality, it informs everything. It's going to inform your career. It's going to inform how you relate to people, and it's visible to everybody. So there's transparency there. And everybody from the CEO down to the mail clerk gets ranked within the organization.
I cannot recall if there's a specific episode of The Office that tackled this, but I could just see that cast wearing numbers on their foreheads, right?
Right. Dwight would want everyone to know.
Look at my number. This will probably be very large font.
So, the good news is you sort of know where you stand. You understand your value within the organization. There's a lot of complications with that. So I wouldn't hold that up necessarily as an example of doing it right. Now, there's been a lot of evolution. So these performance reviews became popular as labor law started becoming popular. And so the 1950s, the 1960s, certain labor laws are being passed, certainly here in the United States. And along with those, this became more and more important. The rise of human resources as a function within the organization became more and more important. They started requiring these. So there's been a lot of evolution over the years of how they're done. Now, in the early days, they were very heavy-handed. The manager sat down, told you everything you were doing wrong, documented it, moved on. Usually there was, if you were doing well, you got a compensation adjustment up. If you weren't, you got threatened. And then as employee rights kind of became more and more popular, it became more of a legitimate exercise. So then in the 70s, 80s, and 90s, now things were documented into your file, that matter. And they'll tell you when you're doing well and when you're not. A lot of, Bill and I were laughing about a Dilbert cartoon that he had shown me where the manager was basically saying, look, I have to put something bad in your performance report in case I ever have to fire you.
Right.
So a lot of managers have that reaction out of fear because they know that, in some states within this country, you can't fire somebody for no reason. You have to have cause.
Right.
So the evolution kind of went on. In the 90s, it got really popular. And I know that John Chambers at Cisco popularized this. I think Jack Welch was one of the pioneers of this method, and they would either call it stack ranking or core, and they would take and rank people in the bottom 10% got cored out of the organization. They were just removed. There were some other organizations.
Another funny name. Jack Welch and GE called it the vitality curve. Now, if I'm that bottom 10% getting cored out of there, I don't feel so lively or vital at the moment. So that was interesting.
And why did you leave your last organization? Well, they thought I didn't have vitality. I was in the bottom 10% and they kicked me out.
They kicked me out. Yeah.
I have a feeling that would probably be an answer you'd rehearse a little bit
Yeah,
differently.
you'd have to overcome that.
Now, I'm sure a lot of us have experienced this, and every time we've gone into a performance review, we think, okay, there's got to be a better way. Is there a better way than some of these ways we've been talking about?
Yeah, and I think it's something that Andy and I have noted. When you look at, look at Cisco, you look at GE, there are other companies. Microsoft recently has made a change, Accenture, dropping the bell curve approach, Cisco, Infosys. So we do see there's an awakening, if you will, or a next, how can we become better in performing these performance reviews and appraisals?
Yeah, and part of that came from this idea that, okay, the problem is with the people. So we always have an opportunity to upgrade our people. This was kind of John Chambers' mantra back years ago. And of course, he was a very effective CEO at Cisco, so he was no lightweight. He's kind of famous within those halls. But they looked at it, we always have an opportunity. There's always going to be a bottom 10%. We can remove those, inject new blood, and it's sort of this, this idea of bringing in some new ideas, new energy, new people, new faces, and put those into the mix and see how they fare, and you'll always remove the bottom 10%. Now the evolution's shifting a little bit. And there's this idea of team and team development that says, look, yes, there's going to be a bottom 10% at any point in time. That's not completely because necessarily, and in any sizable organization, it's not just because you have the wrong people. There are a lot of circumstances that can contribute to that. There are a lot of things that the company, the organization itself can do to bring those top 10% in and move them up, move them to the right, if you will, on that bell curve in effectiveness.
Yep. Many times you've got the right people, you have them in the wrong spot, right? Or they just need training, they need tools. So to churn that bottom 10%, and think of the impact that has on morale, right? I mean, it's one thing if I'm walking the long distance from the parking lot or sitting in the special seats in the cafeteria. But, if I know that, okay, once a year our team goes through this process and we do this review, I'm worried about my job. I'm looking for plan B.
And you have one bad year.
Yeah.
1 year where a project goes south, 1 year where there's massive team conflict, 1 year where you have personal situations that throw you off, and suddenly you can end up on the wrong side of that.
Yeah, we've all had customers before where you're like, wow, I'm so glad this project is over. This customer was impossible to make happy.
I've never had that.
Customers are number one.
But Nick, to your question, so there are some best practices, and I would say really right off the bat, you're going to be dealing with one delineation, and that is there's a big difference between a positive performance review and maybe one that's more corrective in nature. And so right off the bat, you think about that, and most managers go into it and think that way. That's not really the way project managers should think about this. Project managers should look at a performance review as a chance to give open and honest and clear, direct information to their direct reports, to people who have a dotted line to them, however it works. Let them know what's working, let them know what's not, and be as clear and honest and open about that as you can.
Yeah, and because we're so metric driven as project managers, this is not a time to go, oh, this is all subjective. I can't really put my hands on anything measurable. No, that's not the case at all. We have, just as we have weekly status reports in a rhythm in our projects, we do the same with our team members. We know, how productive people are being, how close to their estimates are they coming? What kind of, when I compare their output versus others, how does it stack up? How do they interface with customers compared to others on the team? So these are things that we can measure. So we can be specific, we can be authentic, we can be honest with team members, and we can point to results.
And Bill, you touched on something interesting. In this idea, really, project managers in general, we don't like surprises.
Right.
We don't want surprises on our projects. We don't want surprises with our team. And a lot of the work we do with planning and measuring and communicating is designed to eliminate or reduce surprises. Surprises to us translate to uncertainty, and uncertainty is another word for risk.
Yeah,
which
and then we've got to go
like.
Ask for more money, more time. We don't like that. No.
Exactly.
Yeah.
So in this case, the idea is we don't want surprises with our performance reviews and performance reports as well. We want to be able to talk to people. We want to be able to have honest, open communication, so that at that point, it may be formal and it may be required by HR. It may be required by some functional manager that we give input. But it's not going to be a total surprise to somebody. And how many times have you been involved in a performance review and the person's been shocked?
Right.
I've seen it happen before. They come back and say, I had no idea. I didn't know this was a problem, et cetera. Well, okay, shame on the manager.
Right.
Unless that person's completely disconnected from reality.
Yeah.
Shame on the manager.
Right. That's a great point. And it's interesting when we talk about measurable factors that we can point to in performance appraisals, and that tendency to are we going to hold on to information too long, or do we have too long of a pause, too long of a gap between those appraisals or those conversations?
Right.
Because that's where those surprises can come into play in situations in the past. We let too long go. There was too much time between those reviews or those conversations. And then we realize, okay, we've had a disconnect here.
Right. And so the maximum distance between performance reviews, the maximum amount of time you want is a year. You should at least be giving people annual feedback. We've transitioned here at Velociteach to something more frequent.
Right. And Andy, I think of some of the recent guests we've had on, and I think about our prior conversations on Agile. I think there are a lot from Agile practices that now we're doing with these performance appraisals, which is we need to build a more frequent rhythm into this. There needs to be their natural breaks in our work performance where it makes sense to call a timeout and let's assess, see how we've done.
Agile has retrospectives at the end of each sprint or iteration,
right,
where they're going to sit down, they're going to look at their own practices, but they're also going to work out kinks within the team.
Yep.
And that's the idea when we've started looking at these frequent sort of micro reviews to give people updates regularly so that it's no shock. Now, there's sort of a caveat here, and one of the caveats is that this can be a formal process and probably should be in some ways. These things have to be documented for human resource, and a lot of that's because of labor laws and because of problems when you have to terminate an employee, when you have to part ways. That can be a testy thing, and you don't want somebody saying, well, I never got that feedback. It needs to be in their file. It needs to be documented. It's one of those processes everybody's had to probably well, not everybody, but a lot of us have had to go through that at some point or another and do that very formally.
Right.
One of the things that aligns to my leadership style is this results-oriented work environment, or ROW. And the idea behind a ROW is that employees are really not judged on their effort, they're judged on the results. And so you don't really track the effort, you don't document it, you don't review them based on how many hours they worked, how hard they've worked. You review them based on certain predefined metrics and outcomes and goals. And I really like that. Now, that doesn't work for everybody. And a lot of organizations, unfortunately, it's still sort of in our psyche that we do reward the effort.
Right.
We really reward the person who comes in, stays late, burns the midnight oil, and is stressed all the time, and their brows furrowed. And I remember George Costanza, and do you know what I'm thinking? He decided if you look angry all the time, that people leave you alone. They don't assign you stuff because you look like you've got too much on your plate.
Exactly. And he always had that Penske file, right? He had it in the briefcase. It was well tabulated.
I think this was when he was in the baseball organization. But yeah, he figured out that
he knew
how to avoid getting new work.
Yeah.
So a lot of times we do reward the effort that people put in when really it's the results that organizations are after. And so it's a tough thing to make that transition and say, hey, your effort is appreciated, but it's no longer going to be rewarded. It's not what matters. What matters is the results.
Yeah. And Andy, you and I have had conversations on either from past experiences we've had prior to Velociteach with projects that we've managed and programs, and then even with our team, lessons that we've learned here and
Right.
ways to adjust that. And one of the things that we've seen is we talked about the bell curve and some of the stack and the ranking that was done by some prior organizations. And what we've seen is a transition, and it's what we're mirroring here at Velociteach, to an approach that's more frequent and less formal. So less formal performance appraisals perform more frequently. And again, it smacks of Agile, right? But this is good advice for project managers to embrace this.
It strikes me as maybe this isn't entirely a new idea, though. I mean, I remember 30 years ago, a little book came out, The 1 Minute Manager, talks about 1 minute reviews or 1 minute corrections. Is that what you're talking about, or are you talking about something a little bit more formal?
No, that's a really good analogy, and I also like to bring in the sports analogy with this. You think about maybe one of the highest pressure sports in the United States anyway is the National Football League. It's football. And in the NFL, they're just churning out money. It's unbelievable how successful that organization is. But you look at the pressure on the coaches and on the players to perform, it's huge. NFL's, the other thing it stands for is not for long. So if you underperform in the NFL, you're gone.
Yeah,
right?
I wouldn't trade careers.
Right.
I'm just saying.
Yeah, it's we grouse about they're these multi-million-dollar contracts, but you look at the life expectancy on these guys.
Right.
Yeah, But there, think about when you watch a game or really any kind of sporting event and the coaching that takes place there. It's real time, right? A player misses a block in football, or in soccer they make a bad pass,
and the coach smiles and pats him encouragingly on the back.
Right. Makes a note in a little book to bring it up a year later in a performance review, right? No, as soon as that player comes off the field, and sometimes the coach calls a timeout and says, all right, I got to talk to him now. Or as soon as the play's over, hey, substitute in for somebody else. You see that real-time performance appraisal going on the sideline, right? They're in their face talking about, hey, you missed this block. Because you missed the block, my multi-million-dollar quarterback is on the ground now. He's injured.
Gasping.
Yeah. So, there's something for us to learn in that. And that is the value of, in the moment, providing that feedback.
This requires, though, the manager to really be observant.
Exactly. Yeah. Right. You got to be involved with the team.
And the beauty of that book, The 1 Minute Manager, and Nick, it's been forever since I've read that. But I remember reading it, and one of the points they made was you don't just catch somebody when they've done something wrong. Right. You make it a point to find somebody when they're doing something right. Give specific feedback right there on the spot. And that's going to be terrifically effective. It's so easy for some of us to only observe when people make mistakes, when people miss that block, when the quarterback's on the ground.
Right.
And yet that's not the most effective time to give feedback.
Exactly. Yeah, again, going back to the sports analogy, you look at they literally grade out every player, every position immediately after the game. And they're going to point out the missed blocks and the missed tackles and that kind of thing. But they're also pointing out, to Andy's point, here's where you broke that tailback loose for 15 yards because you had that block on that linebacker. This is, how can we do that again? How can we repeat the good performance?
And you know what? It's easy for those of us just watching as spectators to see who threw the ball and who caught it in the touchdown. But you don't realize that there was a whole clockwork mechanism in the background, and every one of those jobs probably had to be done correctly in order for that to work.
Yep, that's it, yeah. So the idea of, okay, what can we take from that? What can we take from the 1 Minute Manager? What can we take from sports? Things that we see that are working in very time-sensitive, high-pressure environments. And how can we embrace that in our roles as team leaders? So the tendency or the trend to less formal, more frequent feedback is something we're all about.
I recall back in the 1980s, and Coach Vince Dooley for the Georgia Bulldogs would take dog bones, little stickers, and put them on the helmets. And I think they still do something to that end. But he would put little dog bones on the helmets when they made a great play. And suddenly it became visible for everybody to see. It wasn't just feedback. It wasn't just communication, but it was something now for everybody to look at and see.
Yeah, it was a point of pride.
It was a point of pride. You wanted your helmet full of that, and it was a motivating point.
Yeah.
So how do we translate that to the everyday business life?
Well, there's a lot to look at there, Nick, and I think there's a study that I want to point out that Deloitte conducted a public study. This was pointed out in the Harvard Business Review in 2015. And the authors of the study were Marcus Buckingham and Ashley Goodall. Marcus Buckingham, we're very familiar with him. Now Discover Your Strengths, Stand Out, some of the books that he's written. Listeners may have done the Strength Finders survey before to identify skills, strengths, weaknesses, that kind of thing. Play to your strengths. That's really his mantra. And in that study that they conducted, they were surveying executives. And the question before the executive was, look at your current performance management approach. Does it drive employee engagement? Does it drive high performance? And the results were startling. 58% said no.
Wow.
They answered no to that. 58% said this is broken. So that brings us to the point of, okay, the old annual review, holding on to that data for a year after the good behavior or the bad behavior has taken place, and then sitting down and trying to recount it is not effective.
I want to talk about a mistake you made 11 months ago. You know,
Right.
Nobody wants to hear that.
Yeah, it's like 4 projects ago. What are you talking about? Yeah, so there's so much to learn from this, and the survey really hits it out.
Well, Andy and Bill, we've covered a lot of ground, but we still have a lot of ground to cover, and I think we'll take this up in our next podcast. Some tactical practices, some lessons learned, and techniques from other companies. What are some of those companies we want to learn from?
Yeah, some of those companies that have really been breaking ground here are Deloitte, Adobe, GE, Accenture. There's several others, but those are some highlights.
So we're going to get into that next time. Obviously, there are a lot of great resources out there to draw on when it comes to molding a review process. And I'm always impressed at how researched you guys are and how well read you are. So Andy, what are you reading right now?
I'm kind of an exercise in unfocus and dysfunction on that. I'm reading 3 books at once, which is I don't recommend to anybody, but it depends on what mood I'm in and what kind of insomnia I'm dealing with that night. And so I'm reading Creativity, Inc., which I think Bill referenced in a previous podcast. But it's a great book about Pixar. It's about some of their history, how they got going, and then a lot of their process for creative excellence. And it's a fascinating book. I'm enjoying that thoroughly. I'm going through the 7 Habits of Highly Effective People with my oldest son. And he is about to turn 23. And he and I are going through that and just talking through it. And that has been a fun exercise to read that with him and go through it with him. And then I'm reading a fictional book set about 1,000 years into the future called The Abyss at the Edge of Our Dreams. And that one is stretching my imagination somewhat too.
Wow.
So it all varies upon what day or what night. How about you, Bill?
I am also guilty of having more books on the bookshelf, or the bedside table than I really should have. So I'm picking them up, putting them down, depending on what I'm in the mood for. One that I'm reading is called Nail It, Then Scale It. I'll have more to share about that later. The one I want to tell you about today is a fun one for me. It's personal. I have 3 buddies who have collaborated. This is their idea of a midlife crisis, is to write a book. And they wrote a graphic novel. It's called The Jekyll Island Chronicles. And it's the first. They're hoping to continue their habit of meeting on Wednesday nights and writing this graphic novel series. The way this thing is based, just to give you a sense, it's like a alternative history. So they took, if you think back to between the 2 world wars, 1/6 of the world's wealth was in a little place called Jekyll Island. They all vacationed there. So you're talking the Rockefellers, the Vanderbilts, the J.P. Morgans, they vacationed there. So these guys, my 3 buddies, took this, they latched onto that, and they said, what if they came together and created a League of Nations, if you will, or something to that effect, and had to fight evil. So it's a graphic novel. It's unbelievably rich. When you look at the graphics in it, the artistic work is phenomenal.
It really is amazing. It's so well done.
The detail in that art is amazing.
Yeah.
I remember the first time I ever encountered the graphic novel, The Watchmen, which was later turned into a movie, but the graphic novel, and it did a similar thing. It's a history that sort of parallels ours, but not exactly.
Yep.
And there's different elements to it. So they're building on a rich tradition there.
It's a lot of fun.
It really is. Andy, Bill, once again, thank you for your expertise and your ability to pass it on. This might be a good time to invite our listeners to give us a performance review. So, we just want to invite you to tell us what you like, what you'd like to hear in the future on this podcast. And you can do that by visiting us at velociteach.com/managethis to contact us, to subscribe to this podcast, or to see a transcript of the show. And tweet us at manage_this if you have any questions, or if you know someone who would be a perfect guest on our show. We want to hear from you as well. So Andy, Crowe, Bill Yates, thanks as always for sharing your expertise. That's it for us here on Manage This. We hope you'll tune back in on July 5th when we'll continue our conversation on performance reviews. That's all for this episode. Talk to you soon. In the meantime, keep calm and manage this.